afternoon. I'm Jill Silverstein, president of Sandberg Reformed Temple, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our 10th annual Hanukkah celebration, Light Through the Ages, in this beautiful house that we share with our brothers and sisters of Emmanuel Episcopal Church. Hanukkah's universal message of the light and freedom is one to be celebrated as an interfaith experience with our friends and neighbors, and a light through the ages is a powerful illustration of the inclusive embrace of the Hanukkah message. It is our holiday gift to the wider Boston community. With narrative created by our own Rabbi Berman, and with story and song, A Light Through the Ages tells the account of Hanukkah through the centuries. Our program opens with the original Hanukkah story, recalling the historic events we commemorate during this festival season, followed by a brief meditation. From there, we will take you on a journey of a light through the ages, with stories of how Hanukkah has been experienced throughout Jewish history. The program concludes with a candlelight ceremony in which all are invited to participate. Each year, we honor 8 area organizations whose contributions to the cultural and social fabric of Boston reflect the core values of our temple. This year, to mark the 10th anniversary of this presentation, we honor 8 neighboring religious institutions with whom we have worked closely over the years in serving the people of Boston. These historic churches are represented by their senior clergy and joined by colleagues from their respective congregations, each one lighting one of the 8 menorah candles. It is our privilege to welcome the Reverend Dr. William Rich, Trinity Church, Reverend Nancy Taylor, Reverend Donald Wells, Reverend Dr. James Crawford, and Reverend David Story, Old South Church, the Reverend Joy Fallon, King's Chapel, Reverend Stephen Kendrick, First Church, Boston, the Reverend Pamela Wertz, the Reverend Robert Greiner, and vestry members Tom Barber and Elizabeth Richardson from Emmanuel Episcopal Church, Reverend Rob Mark, Church of the Covenant, the Very Reverend Amy McCreath, the Reverend Robert Greiner, and the Reverend Tamara Tucker, the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, and Reverend Kim Kay, Crawford Harvey, Arlington Street Church. We're delighted to share this program with all of you. Following the program, we invite all of you to join us for a special holiday reception in Parish Hall, located off the main lobby, using the exit that you came in, the exit to my left, your right. Now please take a moment to note the exits, the main exit that you came in, and in case of an emergency, there are 3 other exits on Newbury Street and 1 exit through the sacristy into the alley. If you must leave the sanctuary at any time prior to the end of the program, please exit towards the rear and then down the side aisle. Please don't walk up the center aisle or in front of the altar area. And so now turn off your mobile phones and your electronic devices and sit back and enjoy this special celebration of Hanukkah.
We now hear the Hanukkah story from the first book of Maccabees in the Apocrypha, as we recount the events in December, in the year 165, before the Common Era. It was on the 15th day of the month of Kislev that the messengers of King Antiochus set up an idol on the altar of God and had incense burned in its honor. And they gave orders that the people of Judea should forsake the Torah and the covenant, profane the Sabbath, and pollute the sanctuary. And many chose to die rather than to forsake the Holy Covenant. And it came to pass in the village of Moadim that Mattathias the priest gathered the people and spoke with a loud voice. Though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away from the faith of their people, yet will I and my children and my brothers walk in the covenant of our parents. Whosoever is loyal to God and to the Torah, come and follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains, and they went about pulling down the heathen altars, and they rescued the Torah out of the hands of the oppressors.
And when Mattathias died, Judah, his son, called the Maccabee, rose up in his stead, and all his brothers aided him, and they fought with zeal for the faith of Israel. And when the people trembled in fear at the sight of the great number of the enemy, and said, "Shall we be able, being a small company, to fight against so great and so strong a multitude?" Judah answered, "With the God of heaven, it is all the same to save many or few. And all the people shall know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel." And Judah led them into battle, and behold, Israel had a great deliverance. And they sang songs of thanksgiving and praised heaven for all goodness, for God's mercy endures forever. And on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, the very same day, when 3 years before the altar of God had been profaned, the sanctuary of God was dedicated anew with songs and music. And the people praised the God of heaven who had given them great victory. And they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days. And there was great rejoicing among the people. Judah, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that these days of Hanukkah, the dedication of the altar, should be celebrated from year to year for 8 days in gladness and thanksgiving.
May I now ask you to turn to page 3 in our program book for the opening meditation. With grateful hearts, we come once again to this joyous season. We recall the ancient story of this Festival of Lights, the epic saga of faith and courage in the face of tyranny and oppression. We are proud of the legacy of the Maccabees and the devotion to the Torah that inspired their deeds of heroism. We commemorate the rededication of the sanctuary, the consecration of the altar to the worship of the one God of all humanity. And we celebrate the rekindling of the eternal light of the menorah, whose rays shone forth out of the encircling darkness as the beacon of love, justice, and peace for all the world. Together, let us bless the Hanukkah candles, that we may shed their radiance into our homes and our lives. May they kindle within us the light of faith and hope, that like the Maccabees of old, we may confidently join in the struggle for justice. May the joyful celebrations that constitute this season bring the blessings of harmony and friendship to all people. We praise the Spirit of light who has sustained us and permitted us to celebrate this sacred time once again.
As we now transition into the narrative stories, music, and candle lighting ceremony that are the highlights of our cantata, A Light Through the Ages, I will be kindling the center candle of the menorah, the shamus or servant candle, which will give its light to all the others and to all of our candles. And on this first Hanukkah, since the tragedy in Pittsburgh, we dedicate this empowering light to the sacred memory of the 11 martyrs of Tree of Life Synagogue, whose faith and sacrifice have now become part of the chronicle we will recount together today. Friends, for more than 2,000 years, the Hanukkah candles have evoked memories. Memories of faith and courage, of joy and sorrow, of sacrifice and deliverance. All have been kept alive in the flames of the menorah. According to our Jewish tradition, the Hanukkah candles are indeed meant to spark our imaginations and our memories with thoughts of those miraculous events of heroism and redemption that occurred in the hills of Judea and in Jerusalem at this season over 2,100 years ago. Today, as we prepare to celebrate Hanukkah together, with this first night of the festival, I want to invite all of you to join with me in fulfilling this tradition of gazing into the flickering flames of the menorah and contemplating the message of this joyous holiday. I am going to invite you to join me in a journey of the imagination, a journey which will take us back through time to encounter what Hanukkah has meant to our people in every generation. And just as the majestic sweep of Jewish history encompasses both the deliverances and the consolations of our past, we too will find ourselves in circumstances both happy and tragic as we use our imaginations to observe the 8 nights of Hanukkah in different times and places. And so may I ask you to turn your attention, your minds, and your hearts to our beautiful menorah. And with the power of memory and imagination, let us return to the first candle, to the celebration of the first night of Hanukkah, almost 2,000 years ago.
It is December, in the year 72, the eve of the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, the first night of Hanukkah. The place, a fortress on a mountaintop in the desert near the Dead Sea, a place called Masada. It is now almost 2 years since the small group of Jews at Masada witnessed the unspeakable horror and tragedy of the destruction of the great temple and the burning of the holy city of Jerusalem. It is almost 2 years now that they have been isolated in this last stronghold of Jewish resistance in the face of the relentless Roman conquest. The festival, even at this early stage in its history, is already recognizable to us. The people come together and kindle the first light in a clay oil lamp with a flaxen wick. And on this clear, cold night, the men, women, and children of Masada are called together by their leader, Eliezer ben Yair, to observe this newest of holy days, the annual commemoration of the victory of Judah and the Maccabees less than 2 centuries before. As Eliezer and his people gaze silently into the flame, it flickers in the evening desert wind, and they know in their hearts that their own destiny is as tenuous as that struggling light. An elderly sage recounts the glorious story of God's deliverance in the days of Judah, and the people cannot help but wish that they too had been able to win back the sanctuary and rededicate it to the God of Israel. As they stand there in the light atop the mountain, the mothers and fathers look at the light reflected in the faces of their children. They know that this will be their last Hanukkah. Even as they kindle the first light, the sound of the Roman soldiers in the encampment below drifts up to their ears. Their story will not have the happy ending that Judah's did. But as they kindle that tiny flame, the Jews of Masada remain steadfast in their faith that they will die as free men and women in defense of the Torah, as did the Maccabees before them. Suddenly, as they stand there, a small boy begins to chant the psalm. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. Whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. The others begin to pick up the chant and join in the sacred words. Down below, at the foot of the mountain, the Romans hear the singing. They laugh in derision, thinking that the Jews must be going mad with hunger and fear. And then they continue their work on the embattlements. Caesar has ordered Masada destroyed, and before the spring comes, their generals are determined to carry out that command.
And a new day dawns. 4 centuries have passed, and we find ourselves on the second night of Hanukkah, in the year 450. We are now in the Babylonian city of Shur, sitting with other students in the presence of the great rabbis of the famous academy there. The sages are discussing the significance of Hanukkah. They teach that while the festival was originally a military victory, its primary meaning is a spiritual one. They speak in parables of a miracle that when the Maccabees rededicated the temple in Jerusalem, enough consecrated oil was found to kindle the eternal light of the great golden menorah for 1 day only. But then, a great miracle happened there, and the oil burned for 8 days. The rabbis are speaking symbolically, of course. 400 years before, at Masada, it appeared that the Jewish people would survive for only a short day longer. But the Holy One wrought a new miracle, and God's people still lived and studied the Torah. The rabbis at the Academy of Shur have ordained that on the 8 days of Hanukkah, there should be no mourning or fasting, but that all should rejoice in the remembrance of the miraculous deliverance of old. As night falls, the students and their teachers kindle the light for the second night. They chant the familiar words of the Torah, which have recently become a part of the newly compiled text of every regular worship service, the Song of Miriam, sister of Moses, first exclaimed at the shore of the Red Sea following the deliverance from Egypt. This was, after all, the phrase that Judah himself proclaimed as the battle cry of his followers in the Hanukkah story. Mi Chamocha ba'alim Adonai. Who is like unto you, O God? And it was the first letter of each of those 4 Hebrew words that formed the name by which Judah and his courageous band called themselves. Maccabi.
The third night of Hanukkah finds us 1,000 years later in a very different setting. It is December 24 of the year 1450. We are now in the great city of Venice, in the walled ghetto that is the home of the ancient Jewish community of this beautiful city of canals and grand open piazzas. The ghetto, however, is neither beautiful, nor grand, nor open. It is impoverished and confined, closed off from the rest of the city behind heavy iron gates. The Jews of Venice have celebrated the festival rather cautiously and quietly this year. There has been tension in the city since the previous Passover, when an accusation had been made against the Jews with the disappearance of a local Christian child, an all too common pattern of scapegoating and baseless blame. And the fact that it is also Christmas Eve has added to the apprehension in the Jewish section of the city. Tragically, and in desecration of every message that the baby born in Bethlehem would grow up to teach, it was not unheard of for some of the local peasants, after a night of feasting and revel in celebration of their Savior's birth, to rampage through the Jewish quarter and attack the homes of those who were said to have killed him. In one Jewish home, the family has gathered around the table to kindle the third light. The children miss the celebrations and games they enjoyed at previous holidays, but they sense trouble and do not complain. The lights are kindled, and the family begins to sing a Hanukkah hymn, which has lately become popular among the Jews of Europe, here set to a special Italian melody. Maoz Tsur, Yeshiati, Rock of the ages, let our song praise your saving power. Suddenly, there is a commotion outside in the street. The family runs to the window and in terror stands helplessly by as a neighbor's home burns furiously. Some drunken revelers had thrown a rock through the neighbor's window. It had knocked over the Hanukkah candles that stood on the sill, and the neighbor's house was now ablaze. The father bolts their own door and extinguishes all the candles in the house, except the Hanukkah lights. He closes the shutters and huddles his family close to him, waiting for the turmoil outside to die down. As the shadows of the burning house outside flicker through the shutters, the family knows in their hearts that the light of Hanukkah was not meant to be the fire of hatred. They pray that they will be safe, and as they hold each other tightly in the light of their own menorah, they take comfort in its message of faith and hope.
Amen. Time passes, 2 more centuries, and it is now the 4th night. We find ourselves on the other side of the globe in the New World. It is a cold winter night in the snow-covered seaside town of Newport, Rhode Island, in the British colonies of North America. The date is December 4th, 1763. The scene is very different from that of the previous night. The Jewish community of Newport is gathered in its beautiful new synagogue, dedicated only a few days before. The brass chandeliers gleam with light, and the well-to-do congregation is filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the peace and prosperity with which they have been blessed in this new land. Their rabbi, Isaac Turo, ascends the pulpit to address the congregation. He speaks of the story of that first Hanukkah, of the struggle of the Maccabees for religious freedom. His congregation knows how precious this ideal is. Many of them settled in Newport after fleeing persecution and inquisition in other places. The rabbi expresses the hopes of all his people as he prays for the welfare and prosperity of their new home. As they commemorated Judah's rededication of the temple in Jerusalem by consecrating their own temple earlier that week, the Jews of Newport now light the 4th candle and rededicate themselves to the principles of freedom and liberty for which the lights of the menorah have always burned. Little do they know, as they sit there, near the town square, above which flies the flag of Great Britain, that within a short time, they too will be called upon to fight for their own liberty and independence, just as the Maccabees did before them. And they could hardly even imagine that following this struggle for freedom, a new nation would be born, and that its first president, George Washington, would come to Newport, visit this very synagogue, and would then proclaim his own personal commitment that the newly created United States of America would forever give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance.
The fifth night of Hanukkah finds us back in Europe, a century later. The year is 1863, and we're in a shtetl, a little Jewish village in the Russian countryside. We stand as invisible guests in a tiny cheder, a Hebrew school, under the strict control of the town's venerable teacher, Reb Yankel. Actually, since it's Hanukkah, Reb Yankel isn't in such strict control. His young pupils squirm with excitement and holiday anticipation, and they will not pay attention to their lessons. Reb Yankel makes one last valiant attempt. Mein Kinder, kommet's alle vor, kommet's bas ba. My children, recite your Hebrew alphabet. But it's no use. The boys will not concentrate, and kindly old Reb Yankel can't really blame them. After all, it's Hanukkah. So he closes his book, and to the delight of the children, takes a wooden dreidel out of his pocket. The students all have their own spinning tops as well, and soon the room is one big game of dreidel. One of the more enterprising boys takes out some of his Hanukkah geld, his gift of coins from the night before, and begins to play for high stakes. But here, Reb Yankel puts his foot down. There will be no hard gambling in his classroom. Finally, it grows dark, and the children are dismissed. They squeal with joy and romp out into the snowbound streets of the shtetl. As they run home, brightly lit menorahs shine out through the frosted window panes, giving warmth to the bitter cold. Now, while the boys are in school, the girls are at home, helping their mothers prepare the holiday feast. But Hanukkah is very special for them too. During the rest of the year, the celebration of most of the beautiful ceremonies in the synagogue and at home always seem to be the special privilege of their brothers and fathers. The wives and daughters are always in the kitchen preparing the meals for the Sabbath and festivals. This is noble, an honored role for Jewish women, or so the men say. But what makes Hanukkah different is that the tradition calls for the entire family to take part in the ritual. Men and women join together in lighting the menorah and singing the blessings. There are many girls, and even some of their mothers, looking down from the women's balcony in the synagogue, who yearn for greater freedom and opportunity than shtetl life can offer them. Hanukkah's message of liberation, its memory of the faith and courage of many women who played important roles in the ancient story. Hanukkah's opportunity to participate fully in the celebration all have special meaning for these women. Soon, all the children are home, eating potato latkes and singing songs. Life in the shtetl is hard and often tearful. But for this happy holiday week at least, there is no more joyous spot on earth than this little village in the heart of old Russia.
We continue on our journey through time. It is now the 6th night of Hanukkah, the year 1943, the time of darkness. In the Nazi concentration camp of Theresen, it is dangerous for the imprisoned Jews to make any formal religious expression. The SS guards, however, are curious about the strange customs of their victims and sometimes allows religious observances to proceed for their own amusement. Tonight they stand by and they smirk with contempt as the famous chief rabbi of Berlin, Leo Beck, gathers his people around him to observe the Festival of Lights. It is a paradox. It is a bitter irony. And the Jews are painfully aware of this, that they should commemorate freedom when they are slaves, that they should give thanks for Jewish survival when each of them is doomed. And yet, they have come to light the candles with their beloved rabbi. And as word spreads through the camp, the crowd gathers. Tears of memories of happier times come to the eyes of many. And as the 6 already used candles are lit in place on a plank of wood in the absence of a menorah, Rabbi Beck begins to chant the first blessing. But he breaks into a coughing spasm. The Nazis have forbidden any medication for this elderly man. He regains his composure, and he begins again. And one by one, the prisoners begin to chant along with him. By the beginning of the second blessing, hundreds are singing the Hebrew melody together, loudly defiant of the onlooking guards. The SS guards are no longer smiling. They nervously sense a tone of resistance in the prayers of the prisoners. And finally, one of them shoots his gun into the air, cutting the singing short. The crowd disperses, and the makeshift menorah is kicked over. One of its candles, however, rolls to the ground and continues to burn. A small boy picks it up, cups his hand around it to protect the flame, and runs to the children's backs. He sets the candle down in the corner and gazes into it. He remembers the heroism of the Maccabees that he learned from his grandfather in Warsaw. He promises himself that he is going to grow up and that no matter what, someday he will defend his people just as Judah did.
46 years pass, and on the next night of the festival, that very same little boy who did survive the Holocaust has fulfilled his promise. It is the 7th night of Chanukah, 1989, and now a grown man, he stands with hundreds of fellow Israelis by the Western Wall in Jerusalem. He has brought his own children to the wall on this night to welcome a large group of newly arrived immigrants, Jewish families from Russia and Ethiopia who are celebrating their first night of Hanukkah as free people in the land of their ancestors. A giant menorah has been set up in the plaza, the first one many of these refugees from Soviet oppression and African poverty have ever seen. They, and all who have gathered to welcome them home, are modern Maccabees, heirs to Judah's ancient legacy of valor and courage. And as that little boy from the concentration camp, now living and raising up his own family in the ancient land of his people, looks upon the menorah glowing brightly in the clear Jerusalem night, he remembers that candle he cherished only the night before his memories go. And as he joyfully welcomes another generation seeking a new life in the promised land, he prays that reconciliation and healing will come to Israel and all its neighbors, and that all the children of Abraham, Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, will one day live together in justice and peace. These Jews, gathered around the wall in Jerusalem, are a symbol of the eternal flame of our people's faith, which has burned throughout the ages, flickering, almost extinguished at times by the winds of violence and hatred, but nevertheless burning steadily to this very day.
Love that kept on burning, a miracle this day.
And so we come to the 8th day of Chanukah. The time, December 2018. The place, Boston, Massachusetts. And I am unable to tell you the outcome of this latest chapter of our Hanukkah story, because it has yet to unfold. And each and every one of us here today is going to play a critical role in determining this latest part of our story. All that we are today, we are because of what happened on these past nights of Hanukkah over the course of the last 2,000 years. All that we can be as individuals and as a community depends on how we respond to this magnificent legacy of hope, courage, and faith. If we keep that eternal flame alive in our own hearts, then the great miracle of Hanukkah will be renewed for us, as it has been for every generation, as it will be for generations yet to come. Dear friends, many years from now, when future ages tell of this, our night of Hanukkah, here in our time and place, may our candle burn as brightly as those that came before it. May many generations yet to come remember our chapter of this story and be able to praise God as we do in the words of our tradition. Baruch atah Adonai. We praise you, loving God, guiding Spirit of the universe, who did wonderful things for our people in days of old, at this season. Amen. turn to page 6 in our program books as we join in the blessing of the Hanukkah candles.
Kata
Children of every nation and every faith and every people and tribe, whether free or fettered, wake the echoes of the songs where you may be scattered. Yours the message cheering, that the time is nearing, which will see all people free, tyrants disappearing. Happy Hanukkah, a blessed Christmas, and may this be a new year of healing and reconciliation, of justice and peace for all God's people.